Caitlin Clark pulled up from deep just seconds into the game and immediately let everybody know she came to compete, but by the end of the night it honestly felt like she was battling the Washington Mystics, her own teammates, and even the coaching staff all at once. Welcome back to Basketball Fan, because this game was one of the most frustrating performances to watch if you are an Indiana Fever supporter. Now, before criticizing everyone, credit absolutely has to go to Lexi Hull, who at least brought energy and fight all night long. Defensively, she had some struggles, but she still knocked down huge momentum-changing shots and looked like one of the few players actually matching Caitlin Clark's intensity. Myisha Hines-Allen also deserves recognition because she battled inside, played physical basketball, and honestly looked like the Fever's best healthy post player on the floor. And that leads directly into a much bigger concern surrounding this team, because Aaliyah Boston clearly does not look fully healthy right now. No matter what the Fever staff says, something feels off physically. She does not have the same movement, the same explosiveness, or the same defensive presence, and it completely changes Indiana's identity. Without a fully healthy Boston, the Fever suddenly look undersized, slow, and extremely vulnerable around the rim, and the Mystics wasted no time taking advantage of it. Kiki Iriafen was simply too strong, too physical, and too dominant inside, and Indiana had absolutely no answer for her during multiple stretches of the game. Then you add in players like Shot Ori Walker-Kimbrough, Sug Sutton, and Victoria Vivians making hustle plays, hitting timely shots, and playing smart basketball, and it became obvious the Mystics were simply more organized as a team. Meanwhile, Indiana had players disappearing completely. Tyasha Harris gave them almost nothing impactful, and Dawana Bonner looked lost during several possessions. There were moments where passes from Caitlin Clark hit teammates directly in the hands and still somehow turned into turnovers. And that matters because later people will check the box score and unfairly blame Clark for mistakes that were never her fault to begin with. And then there was Kelsey Mitchell, who honestly had one of the roughest games fans have seen from her in a long time. Missing wide-open layups, blowing transition chances, and failing to convert key opportunities late completely shifted the momentum. The most painful sequence came in overtime when Mitchell missed a wide-open layup that could have given Indiana the lead, only for Washington to immediately respond and stretch the game back out. Those are the moments that decide games. What made the situation even more frustrating was watching the offense continue to run through Mitchell late when Caitlin Clark had already completely taken over the game. That is the part driving fans crazy right now, because Clark delivered one of the best performances of her career despite everything happening around her. The stat sheet will never fully explain how hard she carried this team throughout the night. I honestly do not care that Caitlin Clark finished the game shooting 10 for 28 because context matters, and anybody who actually watched the game instead of just staring at the box score understands exactly what happened. Welcome back to Basketball Fan, because through the first 3 quarters Caitlin Clark was struggling with her shot, yes, but then the fourth quarter arrived and she completely exploded. Clark dropped 17 points in the fourth quarter alone while leading the Indiana Fever back from a massive 14-point deficit, and most teams would have folded completely in that situation. Most players stop shooting when they start cold or worry about social media criticism afterward, but Caitlin Clark did the exact opposite. She kept attacking, kept firing, kept creating offense, and hit the huge game-tying shot that forced overtime. That is superstar mentality right there. Elite players do not hide when the percentages look ugly. They keep competing and believing they can change the game, and Caitlin Clark almost dragged Indiana to a win almost entirely by herself. That is why the coaching decisions during this game made absolutely no sense. The Fever were controlling the game early, Clark had rhythm, and the offense was flowing through her perfectly. Then suddenly she gets pulled for an extended stretch, and everything completely collapses. The offense disappeared the second she sat down. I genuinely do not understand the obsession with benching a rhythm player like Caitlin Clark for long stretches while the opposing team builds momentum. If she needs rest, give her a short break, use smarter timeout management, rotate around quarter breaks, but you cannot sit your entire offensive engine for 7 straight minutes and expect everything to function normally. The numbers prove it too, because Indiana got destroyed during the non-Caitlin Clark minutes. Clark finished plus 14 in a game the Fever lost by only 2 points, which is honestly insane. In the short stretches she sat, the entire team fell apart, and that tells you everything about how dependent this roster currently is on her ability to create offense. Right now, Caitlin Clark is the only consistent offensive organizer on this team. She creates the spacing, the open shots, the transition opportunities, and the pace. Without her on the floor, Indiana's offense turns into stagnant isolation basketball and pure chaos. Now, to be fair, this is not saying Clark played a perfect game because she absolutely forced some shots and committed turnovers, but once again, context matters. One turnover happened because Kelsey Mitchell literally tripped over herself after receiving a pass, while other turnovers came from teammates simply failing to catch perfectly catchable passes. Yet the stat sheet still punishes Clark for all of it. That is why actually watching games matters more than blindly reading statistics afterward. Even with all the struggles early, Caitlin Clark still finished with 32 points and 8 assists after stat corrections, which is unbelievable considering how rough the shooting start was. On the other side, credit absolutely has to go to Sonia Citrin because she was phenomenal for the Washington Mystics. She made massive plays, controlled important moments, and helped close out the victory. If Indiana wins this game, everybody is talking only about Caitlin Clark, but because Washington pulled it out, Sonia Citrin deserves recognition too. Still, the larger problem here is the Fever roster itself. The team lacks elite perimeter defense, lacks size, lacks consistent shooting, and lacks reliable secondary playmaking. The offense becomes stagnant far too often, especially when it shifts into endless isolation possessions. And one of the craziest stats from this game is that Kelsey Mitchell has now gone multiple games without recording either an assist or a rebound. Think about that for a second. Nearly 70 minutes of basketball without contributing an assist or rebound as a high-usage guard playing heavy minutes on a team desperate for secondary creation outside of Caitlin Clark. That is a huge issue. Even during stretches involving Raven Johnson, Indiana simply looked completely lost offensively. Raven Johnson can defend, sure, but she does not consistently pressure defenses or create opportunities for teammates offensively. Everything keeps coming back to Caitlin Clark because she is the engine behind everything Indiana does well. And honestly, despite the loss, there is still one major positive takeaway from this game because it proved the Fever need to fully commit to running the offense through Caitlin Clark at all times moving forward. That does not mean she has to take 30 shots every night or force every possession herself, but the offense has to flow through her decision-making because when the ball is in Clark's hands, Indiana actually has structure. Teammates get easier shots, the pace improves, and the offense becomes dangerous. But whenever the Fever drift into slow Kelsey Mitchell isolation possessions, the offense becomes predictable and everybody stands around watching. Last season's playoff success may have convinced the organization that style could work consistently, but this team has changed now. Caitlin Clark is the system. She is the engine. And the faster Indiana fully embraces that reality, the better this team is going to become. Because what fans watched tonight was Caitlin Clark nearly carrying a flawed roster to victory through pure determination and superstar shot-making alone, and performances like that deserve respect. Anyway, this is Basketball Fan. Let me know down in the comments if you agree about the coaching decisions, whether the Fever should fully run the offense through Caitlin Clark moving forward, and what you thought about Kelsey Mitchell's late-game performance. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more basketball coverage. And honestly, another thing that stood out during this game was how exhausted Caitlin Clark looked by the end of overtime, and it makes complete sense when you realize she was responsible for almost every important defensive possession Indiana had. Every time the Fever needed momentum, it was Clark creating something out of nothing. Every time the offense stalled, it was Clark trying to push the pace and generate opportunities. That is an incredible amount of pressure to put on one player this early in a season, especially when defenses are already loading up against her every single night. Washington's entire defensive game plan clearly revolved around making Caitlin Clark uncomfortable, trapping her high, being physical with her off the ball, and forcing other Fever players to beat them. The problem for Indiana is that too many players failed to take advantage of the attention Clark was drawing. There were open shots missed, transition opportunities wasted, and careless turnovers that completely killed momentum at the worst possible times. That is why this loss feels so frustrating for Fever fans, because despite all the mistakes, despite the poor rotations, despite the cold shooting stretches, Indiana still had multiple chances to win this basketball game entirely because Caitlin Clark refused to let them quit. And you could feel the energy shift every time she touched the ball in the fourth quarter. The crowd got louder, the pace picked up, and suddenly Washington looked nervous protecting the lead. That is the impact superstar players have on games even when the stat sheet does not look perfect. They change the emotional energy of the entire arena. They force defenses into panic mode. And Caitlin Clark absolutely did that down the stretch. But the scary part for the rest of the league is that this version of Clark still does not even look fully comfortable yet. Her timing with teammates is still developing, the Fever offense still looks disorganized for long stretches, and there are clearly chemistry issues that need to be worked out. Yet, she still dropped over 30 points and nearly stole a game that Indiana honestly probably should have lost by double digits. Imagine how dangerous this team could become if the coaching staff actually commits to building a complete modern offense around her strengths instead of constantly drifting away from what works. Because right now there are still too many possessions where Clark gives up the ball and then never touches it again while the offense stalls into difficult isolation shots. That cannot happen with a generational playmaker. If you have a player capable of controlling tempo, stretching defenses from the logo, and creating easy looks for teammates, then the offense has to consistently revolve around that player. That is just modern basketball. And another concern fans should be paying attention to is Indiana's defense late in games, because the Fever continues struggling to get key stops in clutch moments. The communication breaks down, transition defense disappears, and opposing guards are getting into the paint far too easily. Washington exposed those weaknesses repeatedly, especially once Indiana started scrambling during overtime. The Mystics simply looked more composed in critical possessions, and that experience made a huge difference. Still, there is no question about who the brightest spot on this roster is moving forward. Caitlin Clark continues proving why so many people believe she can eventually become the face of the WNBA. Even on nights when the efficiency is not perfect, her impact on winning is obvious to anyone actually watching the game carefully. The shot making, the passing vision, the confidence under pressure, and the ability to completely change momentum in seconds are all elite-level qualities. The Fever now have to decide whether they are fully ready to embrace that reality and build around it properly. Because the truth is simple, Indiana goes as far as Caitlin Clark can take them, and games like this only make that more obvious. This is Basketball Fan, and if this performance proved anything, it is that Caitlin Clark is already carrying superstar expectations while still trying to elevate an inconsistent roster around her.